Dust jumped under Cole Mercer's boots as he split a fence rail with his axe. The blow landed hard. Harder than the grief still buried where his wife's ring once sat. One grave behind the barn. One promise he never outran. Then the stagecoach stopped at his gate. A woman stepped down alone. Clara Whitfield. Mail-order bride. Rejected. No luggage. No place to go. Men on the porch laughed. Cole Mercer wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at the stranded bride. "I'll bring you home." Because the moment that Cowboy spoke those words, both their lives were about to change forever. Before we ride deeper into the story, hit subscribe, ring the bell, so you'll never miss another ride through the legends of the Wild West. Now, let's get back to the trail. Dust settled slowly after the stagecoach rolled away. The road emptied. Only the wind remained. Clara Whitfield stood beside the ranch gate where the laughter still hung in the air. Men on the porch across the road had already turned back to their cards. Rejected entertainment was not worth the dust. Cole Mercer rested both hands on the top rail of the fence, watching. The woman had no trunk, no carpet bag, just a worn coat and the quiet kind of stubborn that did not bend. She did not beg, did not cry. She only looked at the long stretch of prairie behind the ranch like she was measuring distance. Cole stepped through the gate, boots slow in the dirt. "You planning to sleep on that road tonight?" Clara did not turn right away. Her voice came steady. "I was planning to find work." Cole studied the horizon. Work was scarce out here. Food scarcer. "You won't find much in Dry Creek," he said. She finally faced him. Gray eyes. Sharp. "You brought me here, Cowboy." Cole scratched a thumb across the scar on his jaw. He had not thought that far. Truth was simple. He just could not leave her standing in that dust while grown men laughed. The wind pushed across the pasture. Fence wire hummed. Somewhere out near the creek a loose board banged against the barn. Clara followed the sound. "Your place?" Cole nodded once. "Ain't much." The ranch stretched thin under the evening sun. Sagging fence lines. A barn roof patched with 3 kinds of tin. Cattle scattered too wide across tired grass. Clara noticed all of it. Not with judgment. With quiet calculation. "You're short 2 fence posts on the north line," she said. Cole raised an eyebrow. "You been counting?" "I've been looking." They walked through the gate. Gravel crunched under their boots. Halfway up the path Clara slowed. Her eyes drifted toward the small rise behind the barn. A wooden cross stood there. Weathered. Lonely. Cole kept walking. Did not explain. Did not look back. The cabin door creaked open. Inside smelled like iron stove smoke and old coffee. 1 table. 2 chairs. A rifle resting across the mantel. Clara stepped inside and removed her coat. She moved like someone used to work. Not decoration. Not waiting. She found a broom in the corner without asking. Started sweeping dust from the floor. Cole leaned against the doorway watching. "You don't have to do that." She did not stop. "If I'm staying under your roof tonight, I'm earning the space." The broom scraped across the wood. Slow. Steady. Cole rubbed a hand across the back of his neck. "You ain't staying long." Clara glanced at him over the broom handle. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether this ranch plans to survive winter." Cole gave a quiet grunt. Outside the wind shifted. Far across the prairie, a distant rider crested the ridge road that led toward Mercer land. Cole noticed. His jaw tightened. Trouble rarely rode alone out here. And tonight, it looked like it knew exactly where to find him. Morning came cold over Mercer land. Frost clung to the fence wires like silver thread. Cole Mercer was already outside. Axe rising. Axe falling. Splitting cedar into neat, angry halves. The rhythm carried across the yard. Sharp. Relentless. Inside the cabin, Clara Whitfield opened the stove door and fetted another piece of wood. Fire answered with a low breath. The room warmed slowly. Coffee boiled in a blackened pot. She stepped to the window. Cole's back moved with the steady force of a man who preferred work to thinking. A man who did not sleep much. She noticed the way his left hand closed slower than the right. Old damage. Not fresh. Another thing the cowboy did not explain. Clara poured 2 cups. She stepped outside. Cole split another log. Wood cracked. She held out the cup. You swing that axe like the wood owes you money. Cole took the coffee. Did not smile. Wood don't argue. Clara leaned against the fence rail. Watching the ranch wag. Thin cattle grazing slow. A roof patch lifting in the wind. Barn doors sagging under years of weather. This place was tired. Not dead. But close. Cole finished the coffee in 3 swallows. Set the cup on the fence. North fence needs fixing. Clara nodded. I saw. He lifted a bundle of posts onto the wagon. Then paused. His eyes drifted toward the small rise behind the barn. The grave. Clara followed the look. They worked the fence line in silence for nearly an hour. Hammer strikes. Wire pulled tight. Wind moving across the grass. Clara handled the tools like she had before. No hesitation. No complaints. Cole noticed. You grow up on a ranch? No. Then how you know fence work? My father repaired railroads. She drove a staple into the post. Hard. He said if something breaks, you either fix it or lose it. Cole gave a quiet grunt. That sounded familiar. They reached the final post near the creek. Clara wiped dirt from her hands. Her eyes drifted again toward the barn hill. The wooden cross stood crooked in the morning light. She walked toward it. Cole did not follow. He stayed by the fence. Watching. Clara stopped beside the grave. The name carved into the wood had faded under years of wind. But it could still be read. Emily Mercer. Wife. Beloved. Gone too soon. Clara stood there quietly. Not touching the marker. Just reading. Cole's boots crunched slowly behind her. You done studying it? His voice carried no anger. Just warning. Clara turned. I was paying respect. Cole's jaw tightened. She died 5 winters ago. The wind pushed across the hill. Cold. Sharp. Clara waited. The silence stretched. Cole stared at the dirt. Storm night. He kicked a stone away. Horse slipped crossing the north ravine. Clara said nothing. She fell. The words came flat. Like something spoken too many times to feel. I didn't catch her in time. His hand rubbed the back of his neck. Rough. I was the one riding ahead. Clara looked down at the grave again. You think it was your fault? Cole shrugged. A man's job is keeping his family alive. Clara met his eyes. And when a storm takes them anyway. Cole didn't answer. Didn't look at her. Just turned and started down the hill. Conversation finished. But Clara followed. The barn door groaned as Cole shoved it open. Inside smelled of hay dust and leather. Sunlight slipped through broken boards. Clara studied the stalls. 2 empty. 1 half filled with old feed sacks. You used to run more cattle. Cole tossed a saddle onto a rack. Used to. What happened? Cole reached for a coil of rope. Then stopped. Outside. Hoofbeats. Slow. Deliberate. Not a ranch hand. Not a neighbor. Someone riding with purpose. Cole stepped to the barn door. Clara moved beside him. A lone rider approached along the ridge road. Black coat. Tall hat. Horse moving with expensive patience. Cole's jaw hardened. Clara noticed the shift immediately. You know him?" Cole didn't answer. The rider stopped near the gate. Even at a distance his presence carried weight. Ownership. Control. Clara felt it before she understood it. Cole spat into the dirt. Victor Hale. The name hung heavy in the air. Clara watched the man study the ranch from the road. Like a banker measuring a debt. Like a buyer measuring land he already planned to take. Cole stepped back into the barn shadows. His voice came low. "Man owns half the valley. And the other half." Cole's eyes stayed locked on the rider. "He's working on it." Victor Hale did not hurry. His horse walked the last stretch to the Mercer gate like it owned the dust beneath its hooves. Cole Mercer stood in the barn shadow. Still. Watching. Clara Whitfield beside him. The man at the gate lifted a gloved hand and studied the ranch. The sagging fence. The thin cattle. The patched roof. He did not need to speak for the insult to settle in the air. Cole stepped out into the yard. Boots slow. Victor Hale tipped his hat a fraction. "Morning, Mercer." Cole did not return the greeting. "What brings you out here?" Hale rested his arm across the saddle horn. "Business." His eyes drifted toward the barn. Toward Clara. Interest flickered once. "Didn't know you'd hired help." Cole's voice came flat. "Didn't." Clara stepped into the sunlight. Calm. Unapologetic. "I work where I'm useful." Hale studied her the way men study tools they might buy. Or remove. Strange place for a woman to land. Clara met his gaze. Stranger place to lose one. Hale smiled thinly. He looked back to Cole. "You received the notice I sent." Cole's jaw moved once. "Torn it up." Hale chuckled quietly. "That doesn't change what it says." The wind moved across the pasture. Fence wire hummed. Cole walked closer to the gate. "Ranch isn't for sale." Hale leaned forward in the saddle. "Everything is for sale." "Not this." Hale's smile faded. "You owe 3 seasons of cattle tax and land levy." Cole said nothing. Clara watched both men carefully. Hale reached into his coat and produced folded papers. Held them between 2 fingers. "The county will take the property by winter if the debt stands." Cole's eyes stayed on the man. "Then winter will have a fight." Hale tucked the papers away again. Amusement returned. "You were never much for numbers, Mercer." He nudged his horse backward. "Dust shifting. But time counts things whether you like it or not." The rider turned down the road without another word. The silence after him felt heavy. Clara exhaled slowly. "That man expects to own this land." Cole spat into the dirt. "He expects a lot." They watched the rider shrink into the prairie distance. Then Cole turned toward the barn. Conversation finished. Clara followed. Inside the barn the light dimmed again. Dust hanging like pale smoke in the air. Cole grabbed a saddle blanket and threw it across the rail. Clara leaned against a stall door. "You owe him money." Cole tightened the saddle strap. "Owe the county." "Which he controls." Cole said nothing. Clara waited. The cowboy finally set the saddle down harder than necessary. 3 bad winters. He lifted a bucket. Cattle died. Prices dropped. He glanced toward the ridge road again. "And Hale buys every debt a rancher can't pay." Clara nodded slowly. "So he squeezes you until the land falls into his pocket." Cole walked toward the barn door. "Simple as that." Clara looked around the barn again. Empty stalls. Broken hinges. A place that used to run strong. She stepped outside into the yard. The wind had shifted warmer now, carrying the smell of dry grass. Cole began stacking tools beside the wagon. Clara crossed her arms. "You told me I wasn't staying long." Cole shrugged. "You're not." "How long is not long?" Cole considered the sky. The sun climbing. Then the pasture. then the empty barn. Finally he spoke. "Until the cattle drive in late summer." Clara frowned slightly. "That's 3 months." Cole nodded once. "You work the ranch. Help patch what's broken. And then? You take the wages and ride wherever you want." Clara steadied his face. Hard lines. Quiet eyes. A man already planning for her absence. "You're setting a clock." Cole lifted a sack of feed. "Everything out here runs on one." Clara looked toward the barn hill. Toward the lonely grave. Then back to the ranch. "If this place fails before that drive?" Cole met her gaze. "Then neither of us will be here to argue about it." The wind pushed across the yard again. Clara stepped forward. Held out her hand. 3 months. Cole looked at it. Suspicious. Then tired. Finally he took the handshake. Rough palm. Callous grip. 3 months. They released hands. Clara glanced toward the north fence. "First thing tomorrow. We fix that roof before the next storm." Cole blinked once. "You giving orders already?" Clara walked toward the wagon. "Just making sure this ranch survives long enough to keep your promise." Cole watched her climb into the wagon bed and start sorting tools. A strange quiet settled across Mercer land. Not the empty kind. The working kind. For the first time in years, Cole Mercer realized something. That rejected bride had not arrived to wait. She had arrived to stay busy. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what this dying ranch needed. By the third morning, Mercer land no longer sounded abandoned. The yard carried new noise. A bucket striking the pump. A broom against the porch boards. The iron stove door opening and closing with purpose. Cole Mercer came in from the barn before sunrise and stopped in the cabin doorway. Coffee was already waiting. Not boiled black into bitterness. Properly made. The table had been cleared of old harness scraps and rusted nails. A folded cloth sat beneath the plates. Nothing fancy. Just clean. Clara Whitfield stood at the stove with her sleeves rolled past the wrist. Firelight warmed one side of her face. The other stayed in shadow. She did not look up when he entered. "Biscuits are hard as fence knots," she said. "But they'll do." Cole set his hat on the peg. That peg had been empty for years. He noticed that too. He sat. Took one bite. Chewed. Looked at her once. "Better than mine." Clara hid the small smile by turning back to the stove. Outside, the wind dragged through the loose roof tin on the barn. A tired metal rattle. Cole rose before the second cup was finished. Clara was already reaching for the hammer on the shelf. By noon they were on the roof. Sun above them. Tar warming in the bucket. The smell thick and bitter. Cole moved with the easy balance of a man made by boards, saddles, and high places. Clara moved slower. Careful. Focused. She held the tin in place while he drove nails through the patch. Each strike rang out over the pasture. Clear. Certain. Below them, the ranch spread wide and worn. Dry grass. Lean cattle. A wagon axle near the shed that needed replacing. Nothing hid its trouble here. Clara shaded her eyes and looked toward the creek. "You ever rest?" Cole drove another nail. "When something here stops needing work. That may be a long wait." "It's been longer." She glanced at him. He said nothing more. That was his way. Words came from him like water from a wind or pump. Slow. Hard-earned. A cloud bank gathered in the west by afternoon. Not dark yet. But building. Cole saw it first. He climbed down and crossed to the corral. Clara followed with the tar bucket. He was already checking the gate latch. Then the water trough. Then the harness on the mule. Always moving. Always braced. Like weather had hurt him before and might do it again. Clara set the bucket down. I can patch the kitchen window before the rain." Cole kept working. "Do it." She stood a moment, watching him circle the corral twice for things no ordinary eye would notice. A loose nail. A split rail. A chain left dragging. He lived that way too, searching for what might fail next. By late afternoon the first wind hit. Cool. Sharp. It bent the grass one way and sent dust skimming across the yard. Clara was inside, pressing fresh putty around the window glass, when she heard the barn door slam. Then again. Harder. She rushed out. The storm had not arrived yet, but the warning had. Cole was halfway across the yard, coat flaring behind him. The barn's left door had torn free of the lower hook and was banging against the frame. Clara caught the rope he tossed her without a word. Together they pulled the heavy door shut against the gusting wind. Wood shuddered beneath their hands. The smell of rain came fast after that. Cole drove the chain through the iron loop. Clara tied the rope tight. For 1 second they stood shoulder to shoulder in the howl. Close enough to feel each other breathing. Close enough for the silence between them to change shape. Then thunder rolled from far off. Cole stepped back first. "Get inside." Clara looked toward the pasture. 3 calves had drifted too far from the fence line. They'll bolt when the storm breaks. Cole was already reaching for his hat. "I know." He headed for the horse shed. Clara grabbed the second slicker from the peg beside the door. "I'm coming." Cole turned. "No. You need another set of hands. I need you dry." Clara held his gaze. The wind caught her hair loose around her face. "You need the calves in the corral before dark." That landed. Because it was true. Cole gave one sharp nod. Minutes later they were riding the near pasture under a sky bruised purple and gray. Rain started in needles. Then sheets. Cole cut left toward the draw. Clara circled wide to turn the calves away from the creek. Mud splashed high under the horse's legs. Thunder cracked so close it shook the saddle leather. One calf broke wrong. Straight toward the shallow wash. Clara leaned low and drove her horse after it. Cole saw it too late. The ground near the wash had softened. Her mare's front hoof sank deep and stumbled. Horse and rider lurched hard. Clara caught the saddle horn and held. Barely. Cole reached her in 3 strides of his horse. He swung down into the rain and grabbed the bridle before the mare could panic. Mud soaked his knees. Water ran off his hat brim. "You hurt?" Clara caught her breath. "No." But her hands were shaking. Not with fear. With cold. Cole steadied the mare until she found footing. Then he looked at Clara with something harder than anger. Something closer to fear with no room to admit itself. "I said stay back from the wash. You also said get the calves in." Rain poured between them. The calf bawled from the brush. Cole almost snapped. Almost. Then stopped. Because she was right again. He dragged the calf free himself and drove it toward the others. They got the herd in just before dark. By the time they reached the cabin, both were soaked through. The storm hammered the roof. But the new patch held. Water ran down the porch steps instead of through the rafters. Inside, the cabin glowed. Orange stove light. Wet coats steaming by the door. Clara knelt by the fire, feeding it split cedar. Cole set a blanket around her shoulders without a word. She looked up. Surprised. He pretended not to notice. A while later she spread damp ledger papers from a drawer near the stove to keep them from curling worse in the wet. Receipts. Tax notices. Feed tallies. Numbers half smeared and half forgotten. Clara lifted one page closer to the light. Her eyes narrowed. Cole. He sat at the table, rubbing a dry cloth over his revolver. "What?" She held up the paper. "This grain bill is charged twice." Cole looked over. Then back to the gun. "Storekeeper's careless." "No." Clara laid 2 papers side by side. One charge from Dry Creek. One from Hale Supply. Same date. Same amount. Same signature mark at the bottom. Only one of them was not Cole's. The fire cracked softly. Rain beat the cabin roof. Cole rose and came to the table. He stared at the papers. Still. Quiet. Then quieter. Outside, the storm pressed against the dark like a hand trying the latch. Inside, under the warm firelight Clara had brought back into the room, trouble took a new shape. Not weather now. Not grief. Something colder. Something planned. And for the first time, Cole Mercer looked at the woman he brought home and understood she was not only changing the sound of his house. She was beginning to see the danger he had been living inside. Morning after the storm came bright and cold. The roof held. That was the first mercy. The second was coffee. Clara Whitfield stood at the table with the 2 grain bills spread flat beneath a tin cup. Sunlight cut through the cabin window and laid a pale stripe across the papers. Cole Mercer stood over them in silence. One bill from Dry Creek Mercantile. One from Hale Supply. Same date. Same weight of grain. Same amount due. Only one carried a crooked mark where Cole's name should have been. Clara touched the false signature with one finger. "This is not your hand." Cole did not answer at first. He took the paper. Held it close. Then farther back. As if distance might change the light. No. Clara looked at the other notices in the stack. Tax levy. Freight fee. Storage charge. Late penalty. The pile did not feel like bookkeeping. It felt like a trap built one nail at a time. Cole set the paper down. "Men like Hale don't steal in the dark." His voice came low. "They do it in daylight and call it business." Outside, the pump handle knocked once in the wind. The sound carried into the room like a warning. Clara straightened the papers into careful order. "If these charges are false, there'll be others." Cole reached for his hat. "Town opens in an hour." "You're going there?" He nodded once. "I'm going to look a man in the face before I accused him." Clara folded the bills and tucked them into her apron pocket. "Then I'm going too." Cole's eyes lifted to hers. "No. You need someone who sees numbers while you see men. I need you here." Clara held his stare. Steady. Useful. Not offended. "Then you need the wrong thing." The silence stretched. Cole looked toward the door. Toward the yard. Toward the life he had run alone too long. Finally he took a slow breath. "Stay close. Speak only when it matters." Clara reached for her coat. "It already does." Dry Creek looked different in daylight than it did from a stagecoach step. Smaller. Meaner. The boardwalk sagged. The dust in the street carried mule dung, old whiskey, and the smell of men who had stopped hoping for rain. Cole tied his horse at the rail outside the Mercantile. Clara climbed down beside him and noticed how conversation thinned when he walked by. Not fear. Not exactly. But caution. A widow in black stepped out of the post office and lowered her gaze. 2 ranch hands near the trough muttered Hale's name and went quiet when they saw Cole. Pressure lived here. It had a smell. Inside the Mercantile, the air held flour dust and lamp oil. Shelves sagged under sacks and canned peaches. Mr. Pritchard stood behind the counter, thin as a broom handle, spectacles low on his nose. He looked up. Saw Cole. Then Clara. His face tightened before he could stop it. Cole laid the grain bills on the counter. "Need these explained?" Pritchard wiped his hands on his apron. "Slow. Careful." His eyes went to the door first. As if checking whether someone else had followed them in. "Looks in order to me." Clara stepped closer and placed one bill beside the other. Same grain. Same day. Same amount. Different supplier. Pritchard adjusted his spectacles. Did not touch the papers. Could be a freight correction. Cole's voice dropped a shade. Could be theft. The storekeeper's throat moved. A bead of sweat formed at his temple though the room was cool. He leaned in and lowered his voice. Hale Supply handles county collection now. Some accounts pass through his office before they come through mine. Pass through, Clara repeated. Or get patted? Pritchard flinched at the word. A customer at the far barrel of nails stopped pretending not to listen. Then the bell above the door rang. Every head in the room turned. Not Victor Hale. Worse in some ways. His foreman. Elias Brigg. Wide shoulders. Black vest. A scar down one cheek like a pale rope burn. He removed his gloves finger by finger and smiled without warmth. Morning, Mercer. Cole did not move. Brigg glanced at Clara. Then the papers. Then Pritchard. Something cold passed across his face. That account giving trouble? Pritchard swallowed hard. No trouble. Brigg rested one hand on the counter. Heavy. Claiming the wood beneath it. Hale likes smooth dealings. Cole answered. Then he ought to stop sending crooked numbers. The mercantile went still. Even the old ceiling fan seemed to slow. Brigg's smile thinned. Careful, Mercer. I am. Brigg looked at Clara again. Longer this time. As for company you keep, town talks. Clara did not look away. Then town should try honest work. It would have less time for gossip. A faint sound escaped the man by the nail barrel. Almost a laugh. Brigg heard it. His head turned slightly. That was enough. The laugh died. Brigg slipped his gloves back on. Hale will be reviewing accounts at the courthouse tomorrow. He tapped the false bill once. If you've got complaints, bring them where they belong. Then he stepped aside and let the thread hang in the room after him. When he left, the bell above the door shook twice before settling. Pritchard would not meet their eyes. Cole gathered the papers. Tomorrow then. They stepped back into the street. The sun had climbed higher, but the town felt colder. Across from the mercantile, a pair of children were being pulled indoors by their mother. At the livery, two ranchers stood with heads together over a wagon tongue, speaking low. Clara noticed how often people glanced toward the courthouse. Not with respect. With dread. On the ride home, neither spoke much. Wind brushed the prairie golden flat around them. Once, Clara looked over and saw Cole rubbing his thumb over the reins in the same rough motion he used when grief got close. Not fear. Control. A man holding himself 1 inch back from fury. When Mercer Land came into view, Clara saw it first. A strip of white paper nailed to the gate post. Cole saw it a heartbeat later and spurred ahead. By the time Clara reached the gate, he had already torn it free. His jaw had gone hard as split oak. What is it? He handed her the paper. County seal at the top. Official language below. Notice of review. Past due taxes. Failure to appear would authorize immediate seizure proceedings before witnesses. Clara read the last line twice. Then looked up at the ranch. At the patched roof. The repaired fence. The smoke lifting steady from the chimney. Home had only just begun to sound like itself here. And already the law was riding up the lane behind money. Cole took the paper back and folded it once. Then once more. Too neatly. That told her how angry he truly was. The courthouse tomorrow, Clara said. Cole nodded. Wind moved through the grass around them. Soft. Deceptive. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried over open land. Clara looked toward the horizon where Dry Creek sat like a splinter in the distance. This was no longer about one cruel man. It was bigger. A whole town bent around his weight. And tomorrow, for the first time in years, Cole Mercer would have to stand in public and fight for what was his. The courthouse smelled of old pine, ink, and men who liked power too much. Sunlight came through the tall windows and narrow bars. Dust moved inside them like slow smoke. Cole Mercer stood near the rear wall with his hat in both hands. Still. part. Clara Whitfield beside him with the folded bills tucked under her arm. At the front table, Victor Hale sat with one boot crossed over the other. Relaxed. Clean cuffs. Silver watch chain. The kind of man who wore calm like another piece of wealth. Beside him stood Elias Brigg. Hands clasped behind his back. Eyes moving over the room like he was counting who might cause trouble. The county clerk called names in a flat voice. Taxes. Deeds. Boundary disputes. 3 widows. 2 ranchers. 1 blacksmith. Every matter bent, somehow, toward Hale. Not openly. Never that. Just enough. A favor here. A delay there. A paper misplaced. A signature missing. Pressure dressed up as law. When Cole's name was called, the room shifted. Not much. Just enough for Clara to feel it. Victor Hale lifted his eyes and smiled as though greeting a guest to dinner. Cole stepped forward. Clara with him. The clerk cleared his throat. Outstanding land levy. Feed freight discrepancy. Storage arrears. Clara laid the duplicate grain bills on the table before the man finished speaking. These charges conflict. The clerk looked uneasy. Victor Hale looked amused. One woman with sharp eyes does not rewrite county books, Hale said. Clara met his gaze. No. But forged marks do. A murmur moved through the benches. Hale's fingers stilled on the table. Only for a second. Then the smile returned. Strong word. Cole said nothing. He just stood there. Heavy as a gatepost. Waiting. The clerk examined the bills. His face tightened. These should be reviewed. Hale leaned back. Then review them. Easy. Generous. Like a king allowing rain. The clerk shuffled papers. Asked for Mercer's original land map. A younger deputy went to the records room to fetch it. He came back empty-handed. Not there. The room went quieter. Hale spread one hand. Records go missing in old counties. Clara watched him. Not his face. His cuffs. His ring. The small motions men forgot to control. He was pleased. Too pleased. The hearing was delayed until the next morning. More review. More papers. More time for a rut to spread. Outside, the noon sun felt harsh after the courthouse gloom. Cole jammed his hat back on. That was planned. Clara looked toward Hale's office across the street. Curtains drawn. Briggs standing out front like a warning nailed to a post. Yes, she said. But if the map went missing today, somebody knew they would need it missing. Cole's jaw worked once. He started toward the hitch rail. Clara did not move. Where was the records room? He stopped. Looked back at her. Rear hall. Locked? Usually. Clara's eyes shifted to the side entrance of the courthouse. Then to the deputy smoking by the water barrel. Young. Distracted. The kind who followed habit before duty. Cole saw the thought before she spoke it. No. You want that land, don't you? He looked at her for a long second. Then at Hale's office. Then back at the courthouse. The answer was already in his face. By late afternoon the town baked under a hard white sky. Shops half asleep. Dogs under porches. A fly buzzing in every window. Clara walked past the courthouse with a basket over one arm and 2 jars inside to look purposeful. Cole waited in the alley behind the livery. Hat low. Horse tied out of sight. He hated this. Not the danger. The sneaking. Men who had lived straight do not bend easy, even when crooked men force the shape. The deputy at the side door stepped away to relieve himself behind the woodshed. Clara turned at once. One quick move. Into the hall. Cole followed 3 paces behind. Inside, the building held trapped heat and stale paper. The side corridor was dim. A row of shelves. A closed records room. The latch had been pulled but not set. Clara touched it once and opened the door. Inside were maps, deed books, boxes tied with faded ribbon, the smell of mildew and ink. Cole stood in the doorway listening for footsteps. Clara moved to the county shelves. Her hands quick, exact, not frantic. She pulled deed ledgers one by one, boundary surveys, tax plats, rail spur petitions. Then she froze. Cole. He stepped in. She held up a long tube tied with blue string. County Survey Office. Mercer Boundary Revision. Not his handwriting. Not his year. They unrolled it across a dusty table. The old Mercer line had been redrawn. Subtle. A narrow shift near the North Creek. Enough to move water rights. Enough to make the best grazing edge fall under neighboring claim. Enough to cripple a ranch slow and proper. Cole stared at the line. His hand flattened on the map. Veins standing in the skin. That ain't my landmark. Clara pointed lower. There. A witness signature. Then another. One belonged to a dead surveyor who had been buried 2 years before the filing date. Cole's head lifted. Sharp. How do you know that? Because his widow was in court today. The truth settled cold between them. Not mistake. Not carelessness. A grave used as a pen. Then Clara found something else. Folded behind the map. A receipt. Hale Supply paying County Clerk Edwin Sloat for revision and filing service. No details. No law citation. Just money. Money always telling the truth when men would not. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Cole rolled the map fast. Clara tucked the receipt inside her sleeve. The door opened. Not the deputy. The clerk himself. Edwin Sloat. Thin hair. Gray vest. Eyes that widened at once. For 1 second no one moved. Then Sloat lunged for the map. Cole caught his wrist mid-air. Easy. Deadly. The clerk gasped. That file is restricted. Clara stepped in front of the table. Restricted from the rightful owner? Sloat tried to pull free. Cole tightened just enough to stop the struggle. No more. No less. The clerk's bravado cracked fast. Sweat showed on his lip. You don't understand. Then explain, Clara said. Sloat looked toward the hall. Toward escape. Toward Hale, even from 2 streets away. Fear had owners in this town. Hale said it was temporary. His voice came out in a rush. Just long enough to force a settlement. He said Mercer would sell before winter and no one would be harmed. Cole's face changed. Not loud. Not wild. Worse. Still. A man stepping onto older ground inside himself. The dead surveyor, Clara said. Did you forge him too? Sloat squeezed his eyes shut. Hale brought the paper already marked. Brigg handled the witness lines. There it was. Clean. Ugly. Real. In the hall, the deputy called out, asking if anyone was inside. Sloat went pale. Clara tucked the receipt deeper into her sleeve and met Cole's gaze. They had enough. Not for peace. Not yet. But enough to cut the first beam out from under Hale's house of lies. Cole released the clerk. Hard enough to leave an impression. Soft enough to avoid a bruise anyone could use later. He took the map. Clara took the ledger page number in memory. And together they stepped into the fading courthouse light with the first solid proof that Victor Hale had not merely pressured Mercer land. He had built the whole noose by hand. They rode home under a red sky. Not pretty. The kind of red that looked like something had already started burning beyond the hills. Cole Mercer kept the map tube strapped tight beneath his leg. Clara Whitfield held the reins in both hands and watched the road behind them every few minutes. Dry Creek had fallen quiet too easily. No boys running in the dust. No old men rocking on porches. Just curtains twitching. Doors half shut. A town that knew trouble had been stirred and wanted no part of the splash. When Mercer land finally rose ahead of them, Cole's horse slowed on its own. The air had changed. Not wind. Not weather. Smoke. Thin at first. Then thicker. Cole spurred hard. Clara followed. By the time they reached the yard, the west hay shed was already on fire. Orange flame licked up the dry boards. Then roared. Heat slammed across the yard like a thrown door. Cole was off his horse before the animal stopped moving. He ran straight for the pump. Clara swung down and grabbed the first bucket. No shouting. No panic. Just movement. Fast. The shed roof cracked once, throwing sparks high into the darkening sky. Inside the corral, the cattle had gone wild. Hooves pounding. Eyes rolling white. Cole filled one bucket. Then another. Water hit the boards and turned to steam before it mattered. Too dry. Too late. Clara dropped her bucket and ran for the corral gate. If the fire reached the fence, the whole herd would bolt. She threw her weight against the latch. It stuck. Swelled from the storm 3 days before. She pulled harder. The wood groaned. Behind her, Cole was dragging a wet tarp toward the shed. The flame had climbed into the rafters now. Red. Hungry. Alive. A horse screamed from the side pen. Not one of theirs. A tied horse. Black. Saddled. Hidden behind the shed wall where the smoke had covered it. Clara saw it and went still for one beat. Then she saw something else. Boot prints near the grain room. Fresh. 2 men at least. One with a heavy heel dragging on the right side. She had seen the gate before on the courthouse porch. Brig. Cole. He turned at once. She pointed to the horse. Then the tracks. Cole's face changed. He crossed the yard in 3 strides, cut the tied horse loose, and slapped it hard across the hindquarters. The animal tore into the pasture and vanished through smoke. No thief left a saddled horse behind by accident. This was no lightning strike. No stove spark. No ranch mishap. This was a message. The hay shed roof gave way with a cracking roar. Flame jumped sideways. Straight toward the corral fence. Cole grabbed the axe from the chopping stump. 1 blow. 2. 3. He chopped through the side rails and shouted once. Drive him east. Clara was already moving. She flung the corral gate wide just as the first frightened steer crashed through. They rode home under a red sky. Not pretty. The kind of red that looked like something had already started burning beyond the hills. Cole Mercer kept the map tube strapped tight beneath his leg. Clara Whitfield held the reins in both hands and watched the road behind them every few minutes. Dry Creek had fallen quiet too easily. No boys running in the dust. No old men rocking on porches. Just curtains twitching. Doors half shut. A town that knew trouble had been stirred and wanted no part of the splash. When Mercer land finally rose ahead of them, Cole's horse slowed on its own. The air had changed. Not wind. Not weather. Smoke. Thin at first. Then thicker. Cole spurred hard. Clara followed. By the time they reached the yard, the west hay shed was already on fire. Orange flame licked up the dry boards. Then roared. Heat slammed across the yard like a thrown door. Cole was off his horse before the animal stopped moving. He ran straight for the pump. Clara swung down and grabbed the first bucket. No shouting. No panic. Just movement. Fast. The shed roof cracked once, throwing sparks high into the darkening sky. Inside the corral, the cattle had gone wild. Hooves pounding. Eyes rolling white. Cole filled one bucket. Then another. Water hit the boards and turned to steam before it mattered. Too dry. Too late. Clara dropped her bucket and ran for the corral gate. If the fire reached the fence, the whole herd would bolt. She threw her weight against the latch. It stuck. swelled from the storm 3 days before. She pulled harder. The wood groaned. Behind her, Cole was dragging a wet tarp toward the shed. The flame had climbed into the rafters now. Red. Hungry. Alive. A horse screamed from the side pen. Not one of theirs. A tied horse. Black. Saddled. Hidden behind the shed wall where the smoke had covered it. Clara saw it and went still for one beat. Then she saw something else. Boot prints near the grain room. Fresh. 2 men at least. One with a heavy heel dragging on the right side. She had seen the gate before on the courthouse porch. Brig. Cole. He turned at once. She pointed to the horse. Then the tracks. Cole's face changed. He crossed the yard in 3 strides, cut the tied horse loose, and slapped it hard across the hindquarters. The animal tore into the pasture and vanished through smoke. No thief left a saddled horse behind by accident. This was no lightning strike. No stove spark. No ranch mishap. This was a message. The hay shed roof gave way with a cracking roar. Flame jumped sideways. Straight toward the corral fence. Cole grabbed the axe from the chopping stump. 1 blow. 2. 3. He chopped through the side rails and shouted once. "Drive him east." Clara was already moving. She flung the corral gate wide just as the first frightened steer crashed through. No answer. Only a long breath through his nose. Then he walked to the calf, bent down, and closed its open eye with 2 fingers. That small motion hurt more than the fire. Because it was careful. Tender. The kind of care a man shows only when he is tired of burying what belongs to him. Clara stepped closer. Close enough to feel the heat still rising from the ruins. Close enough to hear the change in his breathing. "They struck your home," she said. Cole looked at the ashes. Then at the cabin. Then finally at her. "No." His voice came low. Steady. Changed. "They struck ours." The wind shifted over Mercer land. Not empty now. Not abandoned. Burned. Wounded. Marked. And standing there in the glow of what had been destroyed, Cole Mercer stopped looking like a man trying to survive a bad season. He looked like a man who had just decided someone would answer for it. Night settled heavy over Mercer land. The fire had burned itself down to dull red coals. Smoke drifted low across the yard. The hay shed was gone. Just a black scar in the dirt where boards and winter feed used to stand. Cole Mercer did not go inside. He sat on the overturned water trough with the rifle across his knees. Hat low. Eyes on the ridge. Clara Whitfield stepped out of the cabin carrying 2 cups. Coffee. Thin. But hot. She handed one to him. He took it without looking away from the dark hills. "Get some sleep," she said. Cole shook his head once. "Not tonight." Clara sat on the porch rail beside him. The wind carried the quiet sound of cattle settling in the east pasture. They had driven the herd far enough to keep them calm. For now. Cole took 1 drink from the cup and set it on the ground. His hands rested on the rifle stock. Still. Too still. "You're thinking about chasing them," Clara said. Cole didn't answer. He didn't have to. The thought sat on him like a loaded saddle. 2 riders, she continued. "Maybe more waiting where you can't see." Cole's voice came low. "They burned my winter feed." And that's exactly what they wanted. Silence again. The kind that lives between people who understand danger the same way. The cabin lamp behind them threw warm light across the porch boards. But the yard stayed dark. Cole looked toward the burned shed again. Then toward the ridge. Then toward the barn that had barely survived. Finally he stood. Not fast. Not angry. Just certain. He walked into the barn and came back carrying a saddle. Clara watched him without speaking. He began saddling his horse. Tight. Precise. Every buckle checked twice. "You're not riding for revenge," Clara said. Cole shook his head. "Riding for witnesses." That made her lean forward. Cole tied the saddle strap and swung the bridle over the horse's head. "They want me alone," he said. "They want the ranch weak." He pulled the rifle from the porch and slid it into the saddle scabbard. "So tomorrow I make sure the valley knows what they did." Clara stepped down from the porch. The lantern light caught the soot still on his jaw. "You're gathering help." Cole mounted. "Gathering truth." He looked down at her. "For years I kept to myself." His voice stayed quiet. "But men like Hale count on that." The wind moved through the cottonwoods near the creek. Leaves whispering like old paper. Clara crossed her arms. "Where will you start?" Cole turned the horse toward the road. "Boone Ranch." Clara nodded slowly. Silas Boone had lost grazing rights last year after a boundary change. A change no one could quite explain. Cole touched the brim of his hat. "Lock the door." Clara gave him a look. "You think I scare easy?" "No." Cole glanced toward the burn shed. "That's why I'm riding." He turned the horse and rode into the dark. The sound of hooves faded into the long prairie night. Clara stood in the yard listening until the last echo disappeared. Then she picked up the rifle Cole had left leaning against the porch rail. Not the main one. The second. Shorter. But steady. She checked the chamber. Loaded. The cabin door closed behind her with a firm wooden thud. Morning came pale and cold. Clara stepped onto the porch just as the first riders appeared on the east road. 2 of them. Then 3 more from the south trail. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, 6 horses stood in the Mercer yard. Men climbed down slowly. Ranchers. Dusty coats. Weathered faces. Silas Boone among them. Old but straight-backed. Cole rode in last. Quiet. Not triumphant. Just done with the work. He dismounted beside Clara. She looked at the men gathered near the burn shed. They came. Cole tied his reins to the post. Some of them lost land too. Silas Boone walked forward and kicked at the black ashes. "Hay fires don't start like that," he muttered. Another rancher nodded. "Saw Brig riding late last night?" The men studied the damage. The bullet hole in the trough. The dead calf lying near the fence. None of them spoke for a moment. Then Boone turned to Cole. "What's the play, Mercer?" Cole pulled the map tube from his saddle. Unrolled it across the wagon bed. Wind tugged the paper. The redrawn boundary line shone clear in the morning light. "Tomorrow," Cole said quietly, "we take this to town." The men leaned closer. Clara watched their faces change as the truth settled in. Not just one ranch now. The whole valley had been carved piece by piece. Boone lifted his head slowly. "That snake's been robbing all of us." Cole rolled the map closed again. "Yes." His voice stayed calm. But the calm was different now. Not a man enduring trouble. A man choosing to end it. Clara saw it clearly. The cowboy who once lived alone behind fences and silence was gone. In his place stood something harder. Something steadier. A protector who had decided the fight was no longer just for land. It was for the people standing in that yard. And this time, he was not standing alone. By mid-morning, Dry Creek heard them coming. Not fast. Not loud. Just steady. 6 ranchers riding behind Cole Mercer with Clara Whitfield beside him. Dust rising under the hooves. Truth coming into town with no intention of turning back. Porch talk died as they passed. Men straightened from hitch rails. Women paused in shop doors. Even the dogs moved out of the street. Cole rode at the front with the map tube strapped to his saddle. His face gave nothing away. But the stillness in him had changed. This was no longer the quiet of grief. This was purpose. At the courthouse steps, Victor Hale was already waiting. Black coat. Silver watch chain. One polished boot planted higher than the other, like the town itself had been built for him to stand on. Elias Briggs stood one step below, hand near his holster, eyes hard. Hale smiled when he saw the group. A thin smile. A man greeting trouble he believed he could afford. "Mercer," he said, "brought an audience." Cole swung down from the saddle. "Brought witnesses." That word landed. The townspeople felt it. They began to gather. Not close. Not yet. But close enough to hear. Clara stepped down beside Cole and took the map tube into both hands. Her skirts brushed the dust. Her chin stayed level. No fear in her. Only clarity. Inside, the courthouse filled fast. Boot heels on pine boards. Murmurs against the walls. The smell of sweat, paper, and hot sunlight trapped in old glass. The county clerk, Edwin Sloat, stood at the front table looking half the size he had the day before. His collar sat crooked. His hands would not stay still. The sheriff leaned by the far wall. Watching. Waiting. Not a fool. Cole stood before the bench. Clara at his side. The other ranchers behind them in a hard line of worn hats and weathered faces. Victor Hale removed his gloves one finger at a time. Slow. Deliberate. Buying calm. The hearing began. Tax disputes. Boundary review. Then Mercer. Clara untied the map tube and rolled the survey wide across the front table. Paper snapped at the corners. A sound sharp enough to cut. "This revision is false," she said. The room murmured. Victor Hale did not move. Cole laid down the duplicate grain bills beside it. Then the receipt from Hale's supply to Edwin Sloat. No flourish. No speech. Just truth placed one piece at a time where everyone could see it. The clerk went pale. Hale finally leaned forward. "A forged accusation built by desperate people is still a lie." Clara answered before anyone else could. "Then the dead surveyor can come explain his signature." That hit harder than shouting. A widow near the second row gasped. Silas Boone stepped forward and pointed to the witness line. That man was buried before this filing date. Now the room broke. Not chaos. Worse for Hale. Recognition. Low voices. Men doing the math backward in their heads. Old boundary losses. Missing fees. Sudden debts. The sheriff pushed off the wall and came closer. His boots sounded slow and heavy on the floorboards. Edwin Sloat wiped his face with a shaking hand. Hale turned slightly toward him. Only slightly. But it was enough. Fear rushed through the clerk like cold water. "He told me to file it," Sloat blurted. The room went dead still. Hale's head snapped toward him. Sloat stumbled on. Hale said Mercer would fold by winter. Brigg brought the witness sheet already marked. "I only entered the revision." Elias Brigg moved then. One hard step. Maybe toward the clerk. Maybe toward the door. Did not matter. The sheriff's hand fell to his revolver. "That's far enough." Brigg stopped. His jaw jumped once. Victor Hale did not raise his voice. That made him uglier. "You trembling fool." But the shape of power had already changed. The room was no longer bending toward him. It was leaning away. Cole had not spoken through any of it. Not once. Now he did. Just one sentence. "You burned my shed too." No one breathed. Hale looked at him. Then smiled again. "Or tried to. Can you prove that?" Before Cole could answer, a rancher from the back stepped forward. Then another. The first man removed his hat. "I saw Brigg riding from Mercer's west line last night." The second nodded. "I heard shots from the ridge and found Hale's black horse running loose near my lower pasture before dawn." Brigg's face closed up like a fist. The sheriff looked from one man to the next. Then to the bullet-scarred trough board Cole had carried in under his arm and laid by the wall. Real wood. Real damage. real fire ash still black on the edge. Victor Hale saw it all slipping. The clerk. The witnesses. The map. The room. He stood too fast. Chair scraping backward. For a valley full of beggars, you've all grown brave at once. No one answered. That was the end of him. Not a gunshot. Not a fistfight. Silence. The kind that strips a man bare in front of everyone he once ruled. The sheriff stepped forward. Victor Hale. Elias Brigg. You'll remain in town pending formal charges. Brigg cursed under his breath. Hale did not. He only stared at Cole. Then at Clara. And for the first time, there was no ownership left in his eyes. Only loss. Outside, the courthouse doors opened to full sunlight. Bright. Clean. The gathered townspeople watched as Hale and Brigg were led down the steps under the sheriff's hand. No cheers. No celebration. Just witnesses. That was justice out here. Not noise. Truth standing in the open where no man could bury it again. Cole stepped onto the boardwalk beside Clara. The whole town felt different. Lighter. As if something rotten had finally been cut free. Clara looked at him. He looked back. Neither spoke. They did not need to. Because the fight for Mercer land had ended in public. And this time, the truth had won where fear used to live. Spring returned slowly to Mercer land. Not all at once. First the grass pushed through the black scar where the hay shed had burned. Then the cottonwoods along the creek began to show soft green tips. Wind moved warmer across the pasture. The kind of wind that promised work instead of winter. Cole Mercer stood in the yard with a hammer in one hand and a plank balanced across the new shed frame. The smell of fresh cut lumber filled the air. Different from smoke. Better. Silas Boone and two other ranchers worked beside him. No hired crews. Just neighbors. Boards lifted. Nails driven. A roof rising where ashes had been. Cole spoke little. But he worked harder than the rest. That was answer enough. Across the yard, Clara Whitfield knelt near the garden strip beside the cabin. Her sleeves rolled. Hands deep in the soil. A small row of potatoes already planted. Another row waiting. The cabin door stood open behind her. Inside, the table had 3 chairs now. Not 2. Clara wiped dirt from her palms and looked up at the new shed frame. Cole balanced on the top beam driving the last nail. Hammer strikes rang across the pasture. Sharp. Confident. He climbed down and stepped back to study the work. Boone spat into the grass. Looks like a real ranch again. Cole nodded once. That's the plan. The men gathered their tools and rode out one by one. No ceremony. Just the quiet understanding of men who had stood together when it counted. By afternoon the ranch fell still again. But not empty. Never empty now. Clara hung laundry behind the cabin. White cloth snapping softly in the wind. Cole repaired a section of fence along the north line. Sun warmed the back of his neck. A meadowlark sang somewhere beyond the hill. Small sounds. Peaceful ones. The kind he had not noticed in years. When he finished the fence, Cole walked toward the barn hill. The wooden cross still stood there. Emily Mercer. The wind had smoothed the carving softer over time. Cole removed his hat. Not long. Just enough. The past stayed where it belonged. But it no longer held the whole sky. Footsteps came through the grass behind him. Clara stopped beside the grave. She did not ask questions. Did not fill the quiet with words. That had always been her way. After a moment, Cole placed his hat back on. Garden coming in? Clara nodded. If the rabbits don't eat it first. Cole looked toward the cabin. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, warm. Steady. You staying after the 3 months? Clara studied the pasture. Then the shed. Then the barn. Finally him. I thought the agreement was until the cattle drive. It was. Cole shifted his weight slightly. A man unused to saying certain things. The drive's in 2 weeks. Clara crossed her arms. And after that? Cole looked across Mercer land. Fence lines straight again. Cattle grazing calm. The new shed roof shining pale under the sun. A home rebuilt by hand. Then he looked at her. After that. He paused. Not searching. Just choosing the right truth. This place could use someone who knows how to see what's broken before it falls. Clara smiled faintly. That sounds like a job offer. Cole nodded. Long one. Wind moved through the grass around them. Clara turned toward the cabin. And where exactly would I sleep if I accepted? Cole scratched the back of his neck. A familiar motion. The house has room. She raised an eyebrow. And the town? Cole looked toward the distant road leading to Dry Creek. The road that once carried fear. Now just dust. The town can talk. Clara watched him a moment longer. Then she stepped closer and brushed dirt from his sleeve. Simple. Natural. Like it had always belonged there. I suppose someone has to keep this cowboy from burning another shed. Cole's mouth twitched once. Almost a smile. They walked down the hill together. Toward the cabin. Toward the porch. Evening sunlight stretched gold across the pasture. Cattle moved slow through the grass. Smoke rose from the chimney. And for the first time in many years, Mercer land no longer looked like a place a man survived alone. It looked like a place someone had finally come home to. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again, hit subscribe and help keep these old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matters. So till we meet again, friend. Keep your hat tipped to the past, and your heart pointed west.